Hello and welcome to the Poetry Peacast with me, Patricia. Today, with your help, I want to try and work something out. Something that continuously wanders around my head. Gets in there, swirls about a bit, and heads off to that pale blue yonder when I think I've got to the bottom of it, and then, lo and behold, something triggers it and back it comes. It's like that recurring nightmare. My particular version being that I failed to attend any lectures at university and exam time is upon us. My brain never tires of that one, and I bet you've got one like it. Anyway, back to the point. This is something you've indulged me with before, but clearly I didn't solve the question adequately for my brain to put it to bed. This time, it's back again due to the latest Poetry Pea salon event. Sean O'Connor and Thomas Fester and their discussion of Zen and the message it brings us as poets. After the event, I got to thinking, why is it that we use words like traditional or speak of a practitioner as a purist when we speak of haiku? What does traditional actually mean? So I headed off to the Cambridge English Dictionary and found out that it means following or belonging to the customs or ways of behaving that have continued in a group of people or society for a long time without changing. And if we translate this into haiku terms, haiku would be one that follows the customs or ways of writing haiku that have existed for a long time without changing. And as we know, haiku have been written in Japan, known first as hokku and then haiku, for a very long time, centuries even. We've looked at the history in some depth, and if you've missed that, then I'll put links to the essay and the episodes in the show notes. So even taking into account the various schools of haiku that we've looked at, and the differences between them, there must be some absolute musts of haiku. Some non-negotiables given to us by the Japanese down the ages. Because let's not forget, this is a Japanese genre, which we're trying to write ourselves, in a different language. So I guess what I'm trying to get to grips with is why we term haiku traditional, or contemporary, or anything else. Shouldn't there just be one term, haiku, which applies to all relevant poems? I was rereading parts of early modern Japanese literature by Haruo Shirane and came to chapter 4, and it helped to focus my thoughts. Basically, haiku derived from hokku, the opening verse of a linked verse, and these hokku had to have a kigo, or seasonal reference, and a kireji, sometimes we know it as kiri, which is a cutting word. And in addition to that, I'd add that a haiku should have a sensory image, because haiku rely on the senses, and perhaps I'll need to go into that in a longer, separate podcast, because I'm not sure I made enough, if anything, of that idea when I looked at noun poetry. But for now, I'll content myself with telling you something Michael Dylan Welch has written on his Grace Guts website. Link you know where. He said, or he wrote rather, haiku are not about ideas, but about images. Things you can see and taste and touch. Things you can hear and smell. Which just goes to show how important your nouns are. Anyway, what haiku do not explicitly state are ideas or opinions. That's the role of the clues you scatter about your poem, through the seasonal word, or words, and the images you use. So today let's limit our thinking to Kigo and Kireji, and let's start with the Kigo. What's the point of it? William J. Higginson acknowledges that the season has been the single most important aspect of traditional Japanese haiku and haiku for almost 400 years. There's that word again, traditional. And Shirane says of the Kigo, admittedly he's talking of haiku, but that the Kigo was an encoded sign that indicated a specific season and had specific poetic associations. Now, we've talked about the associations we can find in haiku, most recently when you and I looked at the power of nouns. And it occurs to me that none of the feedback I received suggested that the associations that came from the nouns that were used in the poem were dependent on the location of the reader or the poet, something that's often levelled at Kigo. You've heard it. We can't use seasonal words because this, i.e. haiku, is a global phenomenon and different areas have different seasons or none at all. This argument displays a lack of understanding of the Kigo. Yes, it's about the season, but more than that, it's there to set the tone of the poem, to make suggestions to your reader, to create some emotional depth. To go back to Shirane again, he says of the seasonal word that it often exists simultaneously on a number of axes in different contexts. As a reference to an external scene, as an implicit metaphor or extension of the poet's inner state, and as a complex literary and cultural sign. It does sound more complicated than it is, perhaps. We'll break it down in some of the poems I'll talk about today. And just a couple more things before I continue on to the Kireji. Maybe we shouldn't think of the Kigo in terms of words, but feelings. Not an original thought from me, but I think Yasuda expresses this idea well when he speaks of the idea of kikan, or seasonal feeling, that Otsuji developed. It's achieved when we, as poets, use a seasonal reference which permeates the whole poem. And lastly, at least for now, remember that the Kigo does not have to be a single word, like spring. Often the season is given a modifier, spring breeze, something like that. Or there's a suggestion of season by some other means, a mention of a bird or a flower. And your seasonality can be an event. I'll show you some of these things as I read through the poetry I have for you today. Righty-ho, the cut, the Kireji. Well, as you probably know, the Japanese have cutting words that they can employ in their poetry, and we don't. However, that doesn't mean we can't cut our poetry. But before we talk briefly about the means at our disposal, perhaps we should consider the point of it. So Kireji, why do haiku use them? Why should we bother? Again, I'm going to refer to Shirane from his work Early Modern Japanese Literature and tell you what he says because there's a point he makes well that I think is often overlooked. And he says of Kireji that it creates a space between the two parts of a haiku, often causing the two parts to resonate and forcing the reader to find some internal connection. All well and good. Nothing we can argue with there, I hope. But he goes on. The haiku could be either a single object poem focusing on a single image or a combination poem juxtaposing two different elements. Now, we've covered it a little and probably we could cover it more and we'll do that another day. But how often do you hear in your writing circles, "No, you need a juxtaposition. This is a run-on poem"? My contention is that sometimes this is true. But there are single object poems that do have a cut. even a tiny one, when you read them. And this cut does make you pause and suggests you should be thinking about associations between the parts of the poem. I wonder if you're going to write to me and disagree with me about the juxtaposition being a necessity. It's not, really. What is necessary is some relationship between the lines of a haiku. A relationship that creates some response from your reader. Some tension, perhaps, in the poem itself. So I thought we'd have a look at some haiku, and in some cases see how they are successful. That's if you agree with me they're successful. You might not. With a pencil I torture an ant on the desk at night. Katayama Yumiko. Translated by Ueda. And if you want to know where I got these poems from, there will be links in the show notes. Anyway, here we have what could be termed a run-on sentence. But just listen as I read it to you again. With a pencil I torture an ant on the desk at night. Can you hear a little cut? I'm putting it after the second line, but is that where you'd put it? I think it's debatable. There's no punctuation to help us here. Punctuation in this case would have been quite nice. Anyway, the last line, the image of the desk at night, is essential to ground us in the place. But it also gets us asking questions, or at least it does me. Why is this person at a desk at night? Does the Kigo help us? Ant is the Kigo. It's summer. So it's probably hot, and maybe too hot to sleep, and so the poet finds themselves sitting at their desk, probably in my head anyway, with the intention of using their time usefully and failing. Distracted by the ant. But it's not just distraction, is it? It's torture. Using the word torture is, I think, an example of a strong verb. We often hear that, don't we? Strong verbs. Never too sure. In fact, I'm not sure I could actually tell you what they are. I just know them when I come across them. I'll have to do some work on that. Anyway, torture, combined with the idea of summer heat, gives the poem just an extra hint of the sinister. Or is it just me that feels it? Pine mushrooms live 1,000 years in one autumn. Pine mushrooms live 1,000 years in one autumn. Then Sutejo, translated by Ueda. A carpet of leaves. The kestrel sees what I hear. A carpet of leaves. The kestrel sees what I hear. Bisshie from Acorn, Spring 2021. Teetering grass, ellipsis. Just moments ago, a dragonfly. Teetering grass. Just moments ago, a dragonfly. Don Baird, As the Crow Flies, Little Buddha Press, 2013. Dragonfly is classically an autumn kigo in the Japanese sajiki, although here in Switzerland I'd instinctively think of it as a summer image, perhaps edging into early autumn. The poem opens with the image of teetering grass, suggesting that something has just disturbed it. And again, that verb, teetering, it's an unusual one, isn't it? It implies a gentle movement rather than a dramatic one, and immediately makes us wonder, what has caused it? There's an ellipsis at the end of the first line, which gives the poem a wonderfully whimsical quality from the outset. And more than that, it creates a pause that marks the gap between what has just happened and what remains. I don't know about you, but I linger with the moving grass, sensing that something has already departed. And the ellipsis stretches that moment until, in the final line of the poem, we discover the cause. The middle line, just moments ago, suggests that the poem has a relationship with time. The event is already over, yet it remains vividly present through its trace. Rather than showing us the dragonfly in flight, the poet captures its lingering effect on the world. You and I are witness to not the action itself, but its aftermath. The final line, a dragonfly, arrives almost as the answer to a quiet question. The dragonfly itself is absent, it's already gone, but paradoxically becomes more vivid because we imagine its recent presence. The poem invites us to reconstruct the missing moment for ourselves. As I said, the Kigo is the dragonfly. And the purpose of a Kigo is not simply to identify the time of year. It brings with it a whole web of seasonal associations and emotional resonance. For me, the disappearance of the dragonfly speaks of impermanence. It evokes the fleeting nature of summer, a season that never seems quite long enough. It slips away, even while I'm enjoying it. Could that be a metaphor for something? The dragonfly has gone, yet its passing leaves the grass gently swaying. In much the same way, we're only here for a short while in the grand scheme of things. But perhaps, however briefly we're here, we too leave traces of our existence. This road, no one's taking it as autumn ends. This road, no one's taking it as autumn ends. That's Bashō, translated by Hiroaki Sato. Watching the way leaves fall, ellipsis. Hospice garden. Watching the way leaves fall, hospice garden. Meera Rehm, Off the Main Road, edited by Jacobs and Schimmield, from Alba Publishing in 2024. Okay, now the bit that makes me squirm just a little. I'm just going to get on with it. If Poetry Pea has become part of your week and you'd like to help keep the podcast, the journal, the website and all the other poetry adventures going, there are lots of ways to do it. You can buy me a coffee, you can become a member, you can donate via PayPal. You can volunteer some of your time and skills. You can simply just keep listening and tell other poetry-loving friends about the podcast. And don't forget, you can also spread the word on your socials. Every bit of support, however it comes, helps keep this lovely community thriving. Thank you for listening, and thank you for all the support you show me. Through the spring rain, walking and chatting together, raincoat and umbrella. Through the spring rain, walking and chatting together, raincoat and umbrella. And that's Buson, translated by Alison Kirby Record and Adnan K. Abdullah. The opening line immediately places us in the season with spring rain. Classic spring Kigo, which evokes gentle showers that nourish fresh new growth. The word through, I think, is important. On the one hand, you know that the walkers are not avoiding the rain or waiting for it to pass. They're moving through it. They're living within nature, however inhospitable. On the other hand, I feel as the reader, I am an observer, watching this couple through the rain, perhaps almost intruding on a moment of intimacy. Now, this is another translation. In the Japanese version, there would almost certainly have been a cutting word at the end of the first line, but the translators have chosen not to enhance the cut. Perhaps they felt it unnecessary. But without something to suggest a cut, the poem has a pivot in the second line. Does it matter? Oh, I don't know, I'm in two minds. The placing of the cut does impact on the rhythm of the poem. If we're using the three utterances method of reading the poem, the cut naturally falls at the end of the first line. Through the spring rain, walking and chatting together, raincoat and umbrella. But what if we put the cut on the second line? Through the spring rain, walking and chatting together, raincoat and umbrella. What I feel I lose with the cut on the second line is that sense of me observing the scene. Could just be me, though. And there is an elephant in the room, which I should mention. How many times have you heard me witter on about verbs? How distracting it can be to have more than one. How our poem can lose focus when there's more than one verb. I'm sure Buson considered this, but rejected my premise on this occasion, because the repetition of the gerund verbs, the ing, gives us a rhythmical sound almost like the cadence of someone walking. The pace of the words themselves is not hurried. Do you feel that the suggestion is that whoever it is that's walking is not in a hurry, despite the rain? The rain really doesn't impact on these two people. The final line, raincoat and umbrella, for me enhances the idea I'm observing, and from a little distance, for I don't see heads, I just see a raincoat and someone else mostly obscured under the umbrella. But there's just one umbrella, so I'm feeling an intimacy in the scene I'm seeing. And if we circle back to that first line and dwell a second on that spring rain, do you feel we're seeing the sight of a new, fresh coupling, their relationship budding? What else could Buson be suggesting? Well, you can probably find things that I don't, but without saying so directly, he hints at two individuals with different habits or personalities, one with a raincoat, one with a brolly, one wearing protection, one carrying it. Yet they share the same walk and the same conversation. Their differences are quietly acknowledged, but what matters is that they are together. So what we have in this poem is a very ordinary scene, a couple walking in the rain, no biggie. But when you approach the poem knowing that they are walking through spring rain, the ordinary is full of suggestion and possibility. I think that's what a truly brilliant Kigo will do for your poem. It stands out, even before blooming, a wild violet. It stands out, even before blooming, a wild violet. Shiba Sonome, translated by Ueda. Autumn breeze ruffles the reeds, ellipsis. Almost birdsong. Autumn breeze ruffles the reeds, almost birdsong. Neena Singh, Kati Kati Contest, Commended Haiku from 2021. I read this poem in Season 8, Episode 26, actually, and said something like this. Where I come from, autumn is not a season of birdsong. It's almost absent. And now, in Neena's poem, the reeds in that autumn breeze have created something similar. And that's one way of looking at it. Autumn is usually a season of abundance, and the cut after ruffles the reeds in the second line gives you a pause, which somehow highlights the lack of birdsong. It stretches out the song of the reeds in your head. And it gives you time to consider that sound of the reeds is something like birdsong. Notice also that Neena has given us images which appeal to the senses, the sound of the reeds and the birdsong. But she's also given us a vision of those reeds moving in the breeze, which, if you're anything like me, you can feel on your cheeks as you read it. Now, remember I said you can use events to give suggestive seasonality to your work. I've got some examples. One fully formed, the rest not. All will be revealed. Year's End. A champagne glass cracks at the slightest touch. Year's End. A champagne glass cracks at the slightest touch. Bruce H. Feingold from Poetry Pea's Autumn Journal in 2021. No punctuation here, but I've put the cut, at least I feel the cut is at the year's end break. A champagne glass cracks at the slightest touch. And it could be that my view of this poem is skewed by the fact that I really, really don't like New Year. But for me, this poem speaks of how brittle one can be at the end of the year. Now for the not so fully formed. I've been working on a few in my notebook, and I'm going to bring them to you. They're still in the notebook because I still don't consider them finished. But anyway, have a listen. Maybe you've got some ideas for me. But I think they're helpful to try and illustrate what I've been saying. First one. Guy Fawkes Night. M-. Fireworks light up the vomit on the riverbank. Guy Fawkes Night. Fireworks light up the vomit on the riverbank. So Guy Fawkes Night is my Kigo here. And this Kigo will, hopefully, when I'm totally happy with it, work on many levels. Purely and simply, the poem describes a scene from a night of fireworks along a river. Someone, a little over-refreshed during the celebrations, has thrown up along the riverbank. However, using Guy Fawkes Night as my Kigo should add a few suggestions to the poem. If you know anything about Guy Fawkes, you'll know he tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament in London. So I hope you'll have that feeling of excitement, but also a sense of history. And I wonder, might Guy Fawkes Night suggest to you that the person throwing up was up to no good? Maybe, maybe not. Like I said, a work in progress. Now yesterday, I was out on my bike and stopped at the frog pond to practice a little Tai Chi. I normally find it restful to work out a little by the pond, and yesterday I was joined by a stork and a deer. How lucky was I? Anyway, the stork and the deer aside, it did not go well. I was trying to compose a haiku that occurred to me as I was riding my bike up the hills to the pond. Neither the Tai Chi nor the poem went well. But even though it's not finished, I thought it would be useful to talk about it again, so I can illustrate some of the points I'm trying to make. Day of the Dead, full stop. A summer without rain, the frog pond depleted. Day of the Dead. A summer without rain, the frog pond depleted. So that's where I was when I left the frog pond. But there's repetition of the definite article, and if you know anything about me, you'll know I really try and avoid repeating an article. So, on my way back down the hills, I came up with a new version, and I'll talk you through my thinking. All Saints' Day, full stop. A summer without rain, the frog pond depleted. First line. All Saints' Day. Well, that's my Kigo. It's in autumn, suggesting in this instance that things are coming to a natural end. I wanted the sense of remembrance in the opening of the poem. I considered Dia de los Muertos, the Spanish, which is where I was coming down the hills, but that felt inauthentic. I'm not Spanish. I have very little connection to that culture. So, I rejected Dia de los Muertos and went back to the idea of Day of the Dead. And then I got home and Googled it, and it suggested that it's a 2-day festival. And again, that wasn't right. I wanted the poem to be set on a particular day. Change was needed again. All Souls' Day, perhaps? No, I decided that was too much sorrow. I wanted something a little happier to begin the poem with. I started unlocking a few doors in my brain and remembered the nuns from school regularly informed us that if we'd been baptised as Catholics, which we all had, it was a Catholic school after all, then we were all saints. Fabulous. Problem solved. All Saints' Day got slotted in there as the first line. So now I have remembrance, but Saints gives it a happier tone. The upside is I have a solution which removes one of those definite articles. The downside, that I've lost the definite article in the first line, which I'd wanted, because I hoped a reader would take it as a suggestion that I was talking about a specific death. But, that might have been too much to ask. So, all in all, I think I'll probably stick with my new first line, All Saints' Day, full stop. Why the full stop? I think it worked better when it was Day of the Dead, but the idea is to suggest the absolute end of something, in this case a person, or a saint now. That's something I'll be thinking over. On to the second line. A summer without rain. Possibly you're shouting at me, you can't have 2 Kigo in one haiku. Well, I'm going to disagree with you. I think you can if there is one dominant Kigo. And I think the first one is dominant. Although, I admit that coming down those hills, I was rolling a few ideas around my mind to remove that second season. Things like, no rain this autumn. But I was rejecting everything I came up with because whatever I came up with didn't give the poem the meaning I wanted. I wanted to suggest the passing of more than a season. Anyway, I haven't said it explicitly, but with the line, a summer without rain, I hope you're thinking drought. I really want you to be thinking drought as we go into the next line, which is the frog pond depleted. So if you weren't heading for drought before, I really hope you are now. I'd like you thinking about what the lack of rain means to us. It's a hardship which causes us suffering. Now we're in metaphor territory. The first line, All Saints' Day, plays off the remainder of the poem to suggest, I hope, that the death of a person the poet is close to has deprived them of all the good things which that person brought to their lives. As always, your thoughts are most welcome. All Saints' Day, a summer without rain, the frog pond depleted. And that was my last poem of the day. But before I conclude, I'm going to pose another question, one asked by Robert D. Wilson. Why are some in the Anglo-West advocating a haiku-like poetry they label haiku that doesn't see a necessity for Kigo, let alone resemble the genre the Japanese shared with the Anglo-Western world over 3 centuries ago? Why are many justifying this stance by declaring that American haiku is a distinct genre apart from haiku? My answer, prepare yourselves, it might sound a bit harsh. They do that to justify their writing and publishing decisions, because it's not just all about the poet, it's about editors too. If we accept, and you may not accept this premise, that the haiku we write should, if we want to call them haiku, respect the non-negotiables of haiku that have been passed down the ages, then they should at the very least include Kigo, Kireji, and concrete images which you can see, feel, hear, touch or smell. If that's the case, then there are no contemporary, there are no traditional haiku, there are only haiku. Short poems written without these non-negotiables should not be described as haiku. Perhaps they're senryu, and if you've been listening to me for a while, you'll know I've set out what they are. And there will be links in the show notes, or you can search for senryu on the website. Anyway, poems which do not fall into the haiku or senryu categories can and should be described as short poems, without prejudice or sniffiness. A good short poem should be respected for what it is, as should a good haiku or a good senryu. Okay, what do you say to that? Let me know. You know I'm open to your thoughts. So next week, I'm back with more poetry from the video prompt, which, bless her, was edited and curated by the lovely Lakshmi Iyer. She stepped in at short notice, so I'm very, very grateful. And also grateful to Avinda Kaur, who also volunteered, but Lakshmi beat her to it. Thank you so much for being with me this week. I hope you've enjoyed the poems. Perhaps I've given you some thinking to do. Perhaps you agree or disagree with me. Both are fine. But write to me if you disagree. Well, write to me anyway, but particularly if you disagree with me, and tell me why. Because maybe you'll influence my thinking. So till next week, have a good one and keep writing. Links in the show notes, folks. Ciao!